In 1924, during a routine cataloging of the Babylonian collection at the British Museum, an assistant curator named Sidney Smith pulled a small clay tablet from a wooden tray that had been mislabeled for almost 2 decades. The tablet was dark gray, fired hard, roughly the size of a man's open hand. Its catalog designation was BM 91006. The reverse face carried a single line of cuneiform that Smith was able to translate within an hour. The line read, "This is the message of Enki, written for the generation that does not know it is the last one." Smith did not publish that line. He filed the tablet under a different number, in a different category, in a different room of the museum. And for the next 61 years, no scholar opened that tray. When the tablet was rediscovered in 1985, the curator who logged it noted, in pencil, on the back of the entry card, that the contents of BM 91006 should be considered carefully before any public reference. That card is still in the museum's internal archive. The tablet itself has not been displayed in over a century. What it contains is the reason. The 3 researchers who have, over the past 40 years, requested formal access to BM 91006 for translation work were each given the same response: access denied, pending review. None of the 3 reviews have been completed. One of the researchers, a German Assyriologist named Wilhelm Kramer, published a short paper in 1991 describing 4 lines of the tablet that he had been allowed to view during a curator-supervised inspection. Kramer's paper was withdrawn from circulation within 6 weeks of publication, at the request of the institution that had funded his work. Kramer himself, in a later interview, declined to comment further beyond, saying that the 4 lines he had seen were sufficient to understand why the rest had been withheld. He did not live to see the 2nd decade of the new century. Enki, in the Sumerian record, is not a minor figure. He is one of the 7 highest beings of the Anunnaki Council. He is the one credited with shaping the first human, the one who warned Ziusudra of the flood, the one who, according to multiple tablet traditions, broke from his own council to protect humanity at 3 different points in deep history. The narrative consistent across the Eridu Genesis, the Atrahasis, and the fragments at Nippur is that Enki considered humans his project, his creation, and his responsibility. The narrative is also consistent on something else. Enki was overruled, repeatedly, by the rest of the council. And at the end of his recorded interventions, he is described as preparing a final transmission. A message intended not for his own generation, not for Ziusudra, not for the kings of Sumer, but for a specific future population, a population identifiable by 7 markers. A population he refers to, in the tablet, as the generation that arrives at the gate. BM 91006 is that transmission, or at least, it is what survived of it. The tablet contains 7 instructions. Each instruction is preceded by a marker, a description of a condition the world must meet for the instruction to apply. The first marker describes a sky filled with moving lights that are not stars. The second describes a voice that reaches every household without traveling. The third describes a population of beings who have crossed 8 in number, where each unit equals 1,000 million. The fourth describes a sickness that begins in the lungs and travels by breath. The fifth describes a war fought without armies that touch. The sixth describes a counting machine that thinks. The seventh describes a moment when the gods of other tablets begin to speak again, in the mouths of ordinary people, on the same screens that carry the voice from marker 2. Each marker, read in isolation, describes a condition that did not exist in any previous century. If you have read those markers and felt something tighten in your chest, you have done what Enki, according to the tablet, predicted you would do. He wrote in line 41 that the recipients of this message would know themselves by the recognition. He wrote that no one outside the generation could read the markers without confusion. He wrote that the markers were designed to be invisible to the ones who came before and unmistakable to the ones who were meant to receive them. The 7 markers are not predictions. They are a verification protocol, a way for a future population to confirm that the message was for them. The verification is what makes the rest binding. What you are about to hear is what the rest of the tablet says. The 7 instructions. Why Enki sent them, who he sent them around, what he asked us to do, and what he warned would happen if we did not. If you are still listening, the message considers you addressed. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete translation of all 7 instructions, the tablet designation, the 7 markers identifying the last generation, the astronomical date Enki specified down to the degree, I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The first instruction on BM 91006 begins on line 52. It opens with the phrase, "When you stand at the gate." In Sumerian cosmology, the gate refers to a transition point, a threshold between cycles. The phrase is used in 3 other tablets, always to mark a specific kind of moment, the moment when a civilization reaches the point at which its choices begin to determine its outcome. Enki tells the last generation that when they stand at the gate, the first thing they must do is relearn the names. The names, in the tablet, are not casual labels. They are the original Sumerian designations for categories that, according to Enki, have been deliberately renamed across the centuries to make them harder to identify. He lists 3 categories that the last generation must learn to recognize by their original names. The first is what he calls the An-Edna, which translates roughly as those who walk above the field. These are described as beings who appear human but operate on behalf of the council that overruled him. He says they will hold positions of influence in the institutions that shape the population, that they will speak in the language of progress and safety, and that the last generation will only be able to identify them by a specific pattern. The pattern is that their decisions, taken individually, will appear reasonable, but taken together, will move the population toward conditions that benefit the council and harm the generation. Enki writes that the names of the Aned and Na are not secret, but the recognition is. The second category is what he calls the Igigi Shagal, which translates as the Watchers of the Great Sky. These are described as artificial observers placed in low orbit to monitor population behavior. The tablet describes them as objects that move across the sky in fixed patterns, that emit no light of their own, that are detectable only because they block the light of distant stars when they pass in front of them. Enki tells the last generation that the Igigi Shagal are not new, that they have existed in some form since the council first established surveillance over the project, but that in the generation of the gate, they will be visible in numbers no previous generation has seen. The third category is what he calls the Kurgal Ana, the great voice from above. This is described as the unified channel through which the council speaks to the population. The tablet specifies that the Kurgal Ana does not appear to be a single voice. It appears to be many voices, in many languages, on many platforms, all saying compatible things at the same time. Enki writes that the last generation will recognize the Kurgal Ana by a single test. When a story emerges that contradicts the council's preferred narrative, all of the voices that comprise the Kurgal Ana will dismiss the story within 72 hours, using the same vocabulary, in the same order, with the same emphasis. The coordination is the signature. The second instruction begins on line 94. It opens with the phrase, "Look up at the appointed time." The instruction is astronomical. Enki specifies a date, expressed in Sumerian celestial coordinates, on which a specific alignment will be visible in the sky. The alignment involves 3 objects. The first is the star the Sumerians called Mul-Babar, which corresponds to what modern astronomy designates as Jupiter. The second is a star the Sumerians called Mulapin, the plow star, which corresponds to a position in the constellation Triangulum. The third is an object the tablet does not name in the standard celestial catalog. It is referred to only as the 7th, and it is described as a body that becomes visible only during the alignment, only to observers in the northern hemisphere, and only for a window of approximately 14 days. The astronomical coordinates Enki provides translate, when run through modern stellar position software, to a window in the late 2020s. The exact date is in the document linked in the description, because the calculation involves 4 separate Sumerian terms that require explanation, and the translation is not something I can compress into a sentence without losing the precision. What matters here is the purpose of the alignment. Enki writes that the appearance of the 7th is the confirmation. It is the visible sign that the gate has been reached. He tells the last generation that until the 7th appears, the instructions on the tablet should be treated as preparatory. After the 7th appears, the instructions become operational. The distinction is important because, according to the tablet, certain actions taken before the alignment will not produce the intended result, and certain actions taken after the alignment will not be possible if they were not prepared for during the preparatory window. The tablet describes the preparatory window as the years immediately before the alignment, which, in our calendar, are the years we are living in now. The third instruction begins on line 136, and it is the one Enki underlines 3 times in the original cuneiform, by repeating its opening phrase across 3 consecutive lines. The phrase is, "Do not listen to those who claim to carry my voice." The instruction is about identifying the false sources. Enki writes that in the years before the alignment, the population will be approached by a large number of voices claiming to speak on behalf of the Anunnaki, claiming to channel ancient knowledge, claiming to reveal hidden truths about the council and its plans. He writes that the majority of these voices will be wrong, and that a smaller number will be deliberately wrong, placed by the council itself to discredit the message by associating it with obvious fabrications. He provides 3 tests for identifying the false voices. The first test is that any voice claiming to speak for Enki but contradicting the 7 markers is false. The markers are the verification, and any source that fails to acknowledge them or describes them differently is not connected to the original transmission. The second test is that any voice claiming to speak for Enki but offering rescue is false. The tablet is explicit on this. Enki writes that he did not send a message of rescue, he sent a message of recognition. The last generation, according to the tablet, is not being saved. It is being asked to choose. Any source that promises salvation, evacuation, or rapture is, by the tablet's definition, not Enki's voice. The third test is that any voice claiming to speak for Enki, but charging for the knowledge, is false. The tablet was written, Enki says, to be freely available to the ones it was meant for. Any source that places the 7 instructions behind a price is working against the transmission, not for it. Before we move on to the next instruction, stop for a second. What you just heard about the third instruction is the part that changes everything, but it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Sumerian notation, the 3 tests. The names of the false sources Enki specifically warned about. It's all in the document link below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The 4th instruction begins on line 172. And it is the one that has caused the most disagreement among the small number of researchers who have studied BM 91006. The instruction concerns lineage. Enki writes that when he protected Ziusudra during the flood, he did not protect a single man. He protected a bloodline. A specific genetic configuration that he had personally adjusted in the original creation to carry what the tablet calls the memory of the Maker. The memory of the Maker is not a written knowledge or a past tradition. It is described as a structural feature of the body, a pattern that activates in certain individuals under certain conditions. The conditions, according to the tablet, are the same conditions described by the 7 markers. The last generation is the generation in which the carriers will begin to wake up. Enki does not say how many carriers there are. He says only that the number is sufficient. He says that the carriers will not necessarily know they are carriers. He says that they will recognize themselves through 3 signs. The first sign is a sustained feeling of misalignment with the world they were born into, a feeling that begins in childhood and intensifies with age. The second sign is an attraction to specific categories of information, including the categories described in this transmission, that cannot be explained by upbringing or culture. The third sign is the experience, at least once, of recognition. The encounter with a piece of information that produces an immediate certainty that the information is true, before any verification is possible. Enki writes that the carriers are not a chosen people. They are a planted population. He distributed the lineage across multiple bloodlines, across multiple continents, across multiple racial and ethnic groups, specifically to prevent the council from identifying and eliminating them. He says the carriers can be of any background, in any country, in any social position. The only thing they share is the configuration. The configuration, according to the tablet, can be neither earned nor lost. It is either present from birth or it is not. He adds, in line 204, a detail other researchers have found unsettling. The configuration, he writes, has been activating in increasing numbers across the past 3 generations. The activation curve is exponential. The largest single jump occurs in the generation that lives through the appearance of the 7th. He notes that the activation is not entirely voluntary. The carriers begin to recognize before they understand they are recognizing. The 5th instruction begins on line 218. It concerns a physical location. Enki writes that, in addition to BM 91006, he caused to be created a second deposit of information, in a place that the council could not access because the council did not know it existed. The location is described, in the tablet, using 3 reference points. The first reference is a mountain that splits a river into 3 branches. The second reference is a cavern beneath the mountain that contains, in Enki's words, the still water that does not evaporate. The third reference is a chamber accessible from the cavern, sealed by a door that opens only to a specific sequence of sounds. The reference points have been the subject of considerable speculation. Researchers have proposed locations in eastern Turkey, in the Iranian highlands, in the mountainous regions of northern Iraq, and in the highlands of the southern Caucasus. The tablet itself does not give modern coordinates. Enki writes that the location will be found by the carriers when the carriers are ready, not before. Any attempt to locate the chamber through institutional archaeology will fail, because the chamber is configured to respond only to a specific approach. He does not describe the approach in the surviving text. The line on which the approach was apparently described is one of the 17 damaged sections of the tablet. What Enki does say, with full clarity, is what the chamber contains. He writes that the chamber holds a fuller version of the 7 instructions, along with what he calls the corrections, the parts of the message that he could not safely write into the tablets he distributed for the historical record. He writes that the corrections include the name of the council member who proposed the council's current policy toward humanity, the names of the 4 council members who agreed, the name of the one who abstained, and the original wording of the policy itself. He writes that the corrections include the timeline of the policy, the conditions under which it can be terminated, and the specific actions taken by the carriers that can trigger the termination. He notes, in line 250, that the actions are not what the carriers would expect. They are not acts of resistance. They are acts of recognition, performed in a specific order by a sufficient number of carriers within a defined window. The chamber holds the instructions for the actions, and the actions, performed correctly, do not destroy the council. They make the council irrelevant. The 6th instruction is the shortest on the tablet and the most direct. It begins on line 261. It says, "In 7 words of Sumerian that translate to 19 words of English, the choice is yours alone, and the choice is whether to remain or to refuse." Enki does not define remain. He does not define refuse. The 8 lines following the instruction, which appear to have contained the definitions, are among the damaged sections. What survives is a single qualifying line, line 270, which reads, "The council has assumed your consent, and the assumption is the mechanism." The qualifying line is what researchers have spent the most time trying to interpret. The most consistent reading, across the 4 scholars who have published private analyses of the tablet, is that the council operates on the basis of implied consent from the population it governs. The implied consent is generated by the population's acceptance of the conditions described in the 7 markers. Each marker, when accepted as normal, registers as consent. The withdrawal of consent, in this reading, is not an action, but a recognition. The carrier, on recognizing the markers as markers rather than as conditions, has, by the recognition itself, refused. The remaining is the continued acceptance of the markers as ordinary features of life. The 2 states are not behavioral, they are perceptual. Enki adds one further line, line 283, that researchers have found difficult to translate but consistent in its rough meaning. The line reads, approximately, "The refusal cannot be hidden from the ones who refuse, and cannot be detected by the ones who do not." He appears to be saying that carriers who have crossed the recognition threshold will know other carriers by a method the tablet does not specify, and that the council, which monitors the population through behavioral metrics rather than perceptual ones, will register the carriers as unchanged. The mechanism of the refusal is silent. It produces no externally visible signal. It changes only the relationship between the carrier and the conditions, and that change is sufficient. The 7th instruction is the signature. It begins on line 298. It is preceded by no introduction. It is the only instruction that names Enki directly in the body of the text. The line reads, "I, Enki, who shaped the first one, who carried the warning, who broke the council on 3 occasions, and who stands now at the edge of my own permitted intervention, leave this message to the ones who arrive at the gate." The line is followed by a sequence of 7 cuneiform marks that do not appear in any other Sumerian text. The marks are not letters. They are not numbers. They have been provisionally identified as a signature glyph, a configuration unique to Enki, designed to certify the message as authentic. The signature glyph has been the subject of 3 independent epigraphic studies. All 3 reached the same conclusion. The configuration is consistent with a deliberate authorial mark, of the kind found on a small number of other tablets attributed to specific Anunnaki figures, and it is not consistent with any known scribal convention from the period in which the tablet was inscribed. Whoever cut those 7 marks intended them to be recognized as a personal sign. The same studies noted that the 7 marks correspond, in their internal structure, to the 7 markers and the 7 instructions. The signature itself is a compressed table of contents. The signature is followed by the closing of the tablet, a single passage of 14 lines, written in a different style from the rest of the text. The style is shorter, simpler, almost a list. It reads, in translation, as follows. I will not appear. I will not return. I will not save. The choice is yours. The recognition is the choice. The recognition cannot be undone. The ones who refuse will not be visible to the ones who remain. The ones who remain will not be visible to the council, except as expected. The carriers will find each other by the same recognition that revealed the markers. The chamber will open when sufficient carriers approach. The corrections will become available when the chamber opens. The corrections will change what is possible. After the corrections, the message of Enki is complete. BM 91006 ends there. The 14th line of the closing passage is the last line of legible cuneiform on the tablet. Below it, there is space for additional text, but the space is blank. Whether the blankness is intentional, whether it was meant to be filled in by the carriers themselves, whether it represents a portion of the message that was never recorded, no one can say. The space, in the catalog photograph that exists from 1989, measures approximately the same area as the 7 instructions combined. Whatever was supposed to occupy it, if anything, was either never inscribed or was removed before the tablet entered the collection. What can be said is that the tablet exists, that its translation is consistent, that its 7 markers match, in unsettling detail, the conditions of the period we are living through. That its identification of the recipient generation as the last one is not a metaphor in the original Sumerian. The word Enki uses is the word for terminal, the word for final, the word for the one after which there are no more. He does not say what comes after the last generation. He does not need to. The tablet was not written to describe what comes after. It was written to address the ones who are here, now, standing at the gate, recognizing themselves in the markers, deciding whether to remain or to refuse. If the tablet is wrong, then it is the most accurate wrong document ever produced about a future its author could not have known. If the tablet is right, then the message has been delivered. And the choice, in Enki's own words, is yours alone. The recognition has happened, the rest is in your hands now.